The views and opinions of our guests are personal and do not represent their institutions or Applied Prevention Science International.
Okay, thanks, Shelley. And welcome everyone to our prevention talk on number 6, preventing suicidal behaviors and associated risk factors. In our prevention talk today focuses on the Network Health Diffusion Model for suicide prevention, developed by a research team from the University of Rochester School of Medicine, headed by Peter Wyman, who is the academic chief in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Division, and program managers Bryan Yates and Chelsea Keller-Elliott. This team has utilized analysis of peer networks and youth adult networks to create a network health diffusion model for suicide prevention. They will describe 2 network-informed suicide prevention programs, Sources of Strength, which trains key opinion leaders within secondary schools to spread health in their schools, and Wingman-Connect, a group training for new Air Force trainees. The University of Rochester's team is also excited to share their successes in promoting social connections during the COVID-19 pandemic. And they will be presenting some ideas for other prevention professionals to consider when undertaking this work during times of social distancing and beyond. And I want to point out that this is really important as we transition, hopefully, out of the pandemic to whatever new life experiences we're going to be sharing. So I will let everybody start, but just a couple of things because of the way we're set up. If you have questions, would you please put them in the chat? I prefer using the chat, and that way we can address everybody's questions. And remember, if you have a question, other people probably have the same one. So please use the chat for that purpose. And then I'm going to turn it over now to Peter. I think you're first up.
Right. Thank you, Zilli. Well, welcome everyone. Glad all of us who you could join us today. Suicide is a major source of years of life lost, and in the U.S., as you see here, rates of youth suicide have increased significantly in this century, along with the overall U.S. population. To date, most suicide prevention programming has focused on high-risk groups, identifying individuals at high risk, improving treatment services. And while those approaches have undoubtedly saved lives, there is growing consensus that significantly reducing suicide rates will require upstream approaches that decrease vulnerability to becoming suicidal. And over a decade, our team has been working in upstream prevention for suicide, depression, and substance use. And there is some optimism warranted from growing evidence that preventive interventions or evidence-based programs that can reduce likelihood of suicidal thoughts and behaviors. This slide shows suicide rates for males in 2018 in the US across ages. And one of the things that kind of pops out here, of course, is this increasing rates that begin in early rates of suicide are relatively rare in childhood. And I think the other thing that comes through here is that suicidal behavior is embedded within social, ecological, cultural contexts, and rates vary. So among Native Americans, highest period of rates is early adulthood, whereas for white males, there's an increase in adolescence, but actually a gradual increase across ages with highest rates for older white males. Females overall, there we go. Overall rates for females are substantially lower. 75% of suicide deaths are males across the lifespan, but females have approximately twice as high, 2 to 3 times more likelihood of suicide attempts, which also have other morbidities associated with those. This, graph also illustrates really this growing, increase across early adolescence and early adulthood. So adolescence, in a way, presents a bit of a paradox. On the one hand, it is the healthiest period of life in many physical domains, and yet increased self-harm behaviors and growing, and the highest period of suicide attempts, highest rates of suicide attempts across the age group. Um, Adolescence is a period of tremendous change, of course. Increased emotional reactivity, risk-taking behaviors, lagging cognitive controls over emotion systems that may decrease adolescents' ability to really step back, appraise, and be able to manage some emotional experiences. And these changes in overall may contribute to increased vulnerability during this age period to stressors that are experienced. And the other area is the tremendous changes in social sphere. On the one hand, growing autonomy in relation to adults and parents, lower help seeking in relation to adults and parents, and also greater complexity in peer relationships, exposure to risks such as substance use, relationship disruptions, which can be triggers for suicidal behavior, but also importantly, exposure to protective peer relationships, and a major place in which teens and young adults also learn and experience effective coping. And that's been a major focus of our work that we'll tell you more about. In the current pandemic, there are ways in which we're concerned about data, for example, from surveys showing that there appears to be some increasing likelihood of young adults saying that they have considered suicide during this period. Some surveys showing increased isolation and hopelessness, some concerns. And yet it's important to remember that, and the data is not in yet. There are always about a year or more of lag time before we really know rates of suicide deaths. And yet there is some reason for some optimism. There is the evidence internationally associated with disasters and crises is relatively mixed. And there is some evidence that adolescents experiencing a sense of purpose and a part of, kind of a cohesive shared experience that we're all going through may actually decrease vulnerability to suicidal behavior. But we certainly have to be concerned about in the period following associated with economic changes, losses that families go through, that we need to be mindful and really thinking about preventive interventions to address those challenges. Our work has been guided, as Lily said, by a network health model, some work that we've done, work that we draw on from other investigators. And the first level of this is the thinking about these social bonds that are protective, relationships that give us a sense of belonging, connection. These are typically measured by those individual connections that we identify, although they may be measured also by individuals naming us, such as in network analysis. The second level is the structure of the groups that individuals are a part of. And there's evidence that being part of a more cohesive network in which friends are friends with each other, there's shared goals and behaviors and norms can offer a protective influence. We found in a study with 40 high schools that schools in which networks were more cohesive, peer friendship networks, but also where youth adult networks, where teens were close to adults that their friends were close to, had significantly lower rates of suicide attempts. So there seems to be a different kind of protection that's offered from being part of a cohesive group than is different than the protection of being connected to one or two people that we feel close to. And last part of this model is really the norms and practices that are disseminated through networks. Are we a part of a network where people support healthy coping, help seeking, more adaptive behaviors, or are we part of a network where it may be more risky? And there's evidence that teens that are more connected, young adults, to networks where they have models of healthy coping are in much more protected. So we're going to spend the rest of our time today talking about two interventions that utilize the networks that adolescents and young adults are a part of. And the first is in adolescence with the Sources of Strength program. So I'm going to pass this over to Chelsea Keller-Elliott, who is going to share that with you.
Yeah, so I'm excited to get to tell you a little bit about one of our network-informed suicide prevention programs called Sources of Strength. So this program utilizes natural peer networks to spread healthy coping, these 8 healthy coping strategies you see here, through a community, and to normalize help seeking and receiving. So our team at the U of R partners with the National Sources of Strength team to research the program and to offer it widely in New York State. But first, let's look briefly at this network health diffusion model, building on what Peter was just talking about. So this is how Sources of Strength and other peer-led prevention programs work. The basic idea here is that in order to spread healthy beliefs and coping strategies and norms throughout a large population, we don't actually need to train or develop every person in that population. What we can do is we can find key opinion leaders, and those are just people whose voices have some sway with the people around them. Maybe they're kind of like trendsetters. So we develop them in whatever those target healthy behaviors are, and that then diffuses out to the population. And that diffusion happens naturally because we are just impacted by the people around us, but it can also really be amplified through strategic messaging campaigns. And the network health diffusion model has been used in a wide variety of prevention programming or health promotion, from smoking cessation to safe sex practices, cardiac health, substance abuse prevention. But I'm going to talk about how Sources of Strength utilizes this for upstream suicide prevention in high schools. So here we're going to see how the Sources of Strength model maps onto that network health diffusion model. So the first step was to gather key opinion leaders in our peer-led programs. We call those peer leaders. And we partner those with supportive adult advisors, and that makes up the Sources of Strength team. The next step in the model is to develop those peer leaders who have the healthy coping and the healthy norms through help seeking and receiving. And we do that by having a whole team training, and then they continue to have ongoing meetings that continues that development. So then the last step in the model is to diffuse that out to the population, which again will happen naturally, but is really amplified through these strategic messaging campaigns that really aim to normalize these healthy coping behaviors, to also normalize help seeking and receiving, and to really provide every member of the community with a chance to actually practice and develop their own healthy coping skills. So I'm going to share a quick video of a Sources of Strength peer leader, and you'll see how she uses her personal story to really engage in this positive social norming. You may want to have your volume ready. I tried to make sure it's going to be at an appropriate level, but I don't want it to be too loud for anyone.
I started fifth grade. I had just lost my uncle who was like a father to me, and it was hard on me because my aunt got with my great aunt was on the deathbed, and I didn't know what to do because they were important people to me.
I saw some confused faces. Were you hearing any sound at all for that? Quietly? Okay, sure.
When I started ninth grade, I had just lost my uncle who was like
a father to me, and it was hard on me because then my aunt got really sick. My great aunt was on her deathbed, and I didn't know what to do because they were important people to me. So one thing I did to do that was go through athletic activities, either going for a run when I got really worked up because I missed them or anything like that. And I was able to talk to like guidance counselors about everything that was going on, and just being able to get my emotions out there and cry about it, it helped me be able to focus more and like come to acceptance of what was going on, and that's a cycle of life that everyone has to deal with and not just me.
Okay. So let's take a little look a bit more. All right, are you seeing this okay now? All right, good, okay. So a little bit more of a look at how a high school social network, one shown here, really informs this work. So here each circle represents a student, and we ask them to name their closest friends, so those lines represent their identified friendship ties. There's a lot to look at on this network, but we're just gonna look at a couple things. First, how risk is situated within the network. So a student who is shaded yellow had indicated that they had had a suicidal ideation. And a student who is shaded red had reported a past suicide attempt. So find your chat box, because I'm going to ask you to drop your thoughts in a second, but what do you notice about how risk is situated here in the network? Any kind of observations, guesses? Feel free to just drop it in there. We're going to let you keep thinking, but one thing we really notice here in the network is that risk clusters, right? There's a couple of places in this network where we really see higher rates of risk in a grouping. Yes, it's clustered and maybe in slightly less connections. It's a little less dense in those areas, right? So on the flip side of that, we also know that healthy behaviors cluster and strengths cluster. So you can also see a couple areas in this network that are really strong, that have close, strong friendship ties. So this is exactly what we've been talking about. We know that behaviors, beliefs, those cluster and spread to the people around us, both maladaptive and healthy. So the goal is to kind of seed healthy behaviors, healthy beliefs throughout the whole network. So then as that diffuses out, it's protecting the entire community. And that leads us to the second thing that I wanted to just look at on this quickly, which is what a well-selected peer leader team would look like. We want the peer leaders to be a diverse group of students that come from all over the social network and really represent all those different social groupings you see in a high school. So this is what a really well-selected peer leader team would represent. And you can see that then with diffusion, the whole network is going to be protected. Okay, then once you have your diverse peer leader team selected, the next step is to then train them, to develop them in those healthy coping strategies to manage stress and challenges. So this is where the sources of strength wheel comes in. So again, I'm going to ask you in just a minute to drop some things in the chat box. So head on over there, get your chat box ready. First is that, so here are these 8 different resiliency factors. And this is what the peer leaders are developed in through that training and their ongoing meetings. And they're then spreading these out to the rest of the community through their campaigns. So 3 of these strengths, starting with the orange one, family support, positive friends, and mentors, really focus on the people in our life that support us, that build us up, that are there for us, and that we could turn to in times of stress. So I want you to think for yourself, who is one person who has shown up for you in your life, has had a positive impact on you in some way, and just drop their name in the chat box. So we can just see a couple names of people who are showing up for us. All right, so keep thinking about that and dropping that in there. And we're gonna think a little bit, I love seeing this pop up. I see family in there, friends, really great. So 3 of these other strengths are more around the practices that we maintain for ourselves or ourselves in our lives that help us. So that's healthy activities, generosity, and spirituality. In spirituality, we talk about broadly, meaning anything that lifts your spirit, helps you feel connected, or helps you kind of connect to your own purpose. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is think about some kind of healthy practice you can honestly commit to spending at least 5 minutes doing today and tomorrow. So there'll be 10 minutes total. It's not too much, but it could be reading, it could be exercising, checking in with a friend, helping somebody out, reflecting on things that you're grateful for, doing a mindfulness practice, and drop that into the chat too. What you can commit to doing for a couple minutes over the next few days. And then I want you tomorrow evening, check in with yourself and see if you were successful at doing these 10 minutes of self-care. The last two strengths on here, physical health and mental health, really remind us about how we need to take care of our minds and our bodies, and that we need to be doing it every day. We don't want to wait until we have a physical health problem to take care of ourselves. We want to be drinking enough water and brushing our teeth every day. Same idea with mental health. We don't want to wait until we get into a mental health crisis to do things every day to care for ourselves and care for our emotions. But again, on the flip side of that, if something happened and we had an accident and broke a leg, we would go to a doctor and get professional help for that. And in the same way, we want our young people to be thinking about mental health, that sometimes things just happen. And if you're struggling emotionally, or if you notice a friend is going through a challenging emotional time, we want to get them connected to professional mental health that can help them, that we don't deserve to walk around in pain, that we can get help, and it is good to do that. And for teens, this act of seeking out help when it's needed and cultivating positive relationships with healthy adults is really vital and essential to prevention work. So here's another way to look at part of the social network within a school, specifically connections between adults and students. What we see here on that outer ring of circles, those represent students. The inner ring, those blue shaded circles, those represent the adults in the school. And then the lines are students having identified an adult as a trusted adult. And the darker blue and larger the circle of that adult, the more students had identified them as a trusted adult. So we can compare this type of network between two different schools. What we see here in this school on the left is that the ties to adults are fairly spread out between the adults. Lots of different adults have been identified, and it's kind of spread out fairly evenly. There are also a lot of students who did not name any trusted adult in their school. On the right-hand side, the school over there on the right, what we see is that the trusted adult connections are really centralized and focused in a couple kind of high-flying adults. And we also see that there are only a few students who didn't name a trusted adult. And when we compare the risk between these two schools, what we see is that the school on the right is the safer school. And there's a lot that we can kind of think about with that, but just a couple of kind of key takeaways for that is that when we're thinking about our prevention efforts, we really want to be thinking about making sure that every student has a trusted adult. It's not as essential to make sure that every adult is creating trusted ties. That we really want to make sure that we're getting an even spread among students for their trusted adult ties. And as Peter mentioned earlier, it actually is really protective for teens to share a trusted adult with a friend. You can think about if somebody had a situation where they needed to seek help, having a shared adult is going to be really helpful. Okay, so just a kind of couple last notes I wanted to share are kind of broadly some ways that this can be brought outside or thinking about network-informed prevention. So first of all, some of the research findings from using the Network Health Diffusion Model with Source of Strength is that peer leaders became 4 times more likely to get help for a friend who was suicidal. They also developed more ties with adults. And then school-wide, we saw an increase in help-seeking acceptability. So the idea that it really is good to go to adults for help and breaking down that code of silence that sometimes happens for teens, the idea of I'm being a good friend if I keep your secret for you, even if that secret is dangerous. So really increasing help-seeking acceptability and the idea, again, that adults are going to be helpful if you go to them. And we also saw the biggest gains school-wide were for students who had had previous suicide attempts. So in a couple of takeaways, especially kind of in light of COVID, is that teens are really eager, always, even pre-COVID, but especially now, to build healthy connections within their school and to help promote a community of strength and community of health. So really identifying those leaders, developing them as leaders, and then helping them to share their stories can be really powerful. Another point on that is that how they share that story is important. So we want to have kind of a sharp eye for that messaging. Especially when a program is peer-led, it's important that the messaging has a positive tone. We don't want it to be kind of scare tactics or using a lot of shock value or really focusing on sharing traumatic stories. What we've seen is that that ends up actually causing more harm than it does help. So whatever the peers are sharing about is what they're going to be normalizing. So we want them to use messages that normalize hope, help, and strength. And then, as Peter was talking about, it's likely that over the past year, a lot of people, including teens, are experiencing a lot of disruption in their interpersonal relationships. But in sources, we really normalize that our strengths ebb and flow. And they're going to change over time. And if we identify that some area of our life feels weak, we can work to change that. So we're going to want to be thinking as we move forward about having those conversations with teens about how they can build back up those supportive connections. And the last note is that over the past year, this program became fully adapted to be run online with a lot of success. So after Bryan shares about Wingman-Connect, which also is adapted for online, we're going to just give some kind of takeaways from that experience.
Chelsea, can I just jump in here a minute? There's a couple of questions about the program itself. Could you talk a little bit about the selection of the peer leaders and a little bit about the training that's involved?
Yeah,
and, yeah. Do you do this? You do this network analysis before and after, right?
Okay, so I'll touch on all of that a little bit. I wondered if the question about peer leader selection was going to come up. That always kind of sparks some ideas. So it's actually pretty simple to do that. We partnered with somebody who did some research around choosing an effective peer leader team. And what we found is that if you just let students within the school nominate each other, they will nominate those key opinion leaders, especially if you have them do it by grade level. They're going to help get that. And then you just need some adults to kind of look over it afterward, think about if any groups were missed and pull some more people in. But that's actually really the easiest way and a really effective way to do that. We don't do the network analysis at every school. We've done it for a group of schools during times of research, but we actually don't need to do that to find those peer leaders. And the training. So there's a question about the training. Okay. And I'll just give a really brief description of that. We just get the whole team together, the peer leaders and adult advisors. When it's in person, it's generally been about 5 to 6 hours long together. It's very interactive. It is not, didactic. It's not us just speaking to them. It's small group conversations, it's games, and we're doing the same thing when we do it online. It's shorter because we don't want to ask teens to stare at a computer screen for 6 hours straight. But it's still games, highly interactive conversations to build that kind of internal narrative of the strength.
Are there any other questions to put in? You can put it in the chat. And I also remind everybody that we're recording this, so I didn't say that up front. I'm sorry. I did send a chat around. There's a question about the exact title of the program, Sources of Strength.
Yep, and I'll drop a link right in the chat for anyone who wants that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Somebody asked if they understand the question, suicidal behavior. Behavior is reported from past 12 months. It's over a 12-month period. The baseline.
Peter, you're muted, but I see nodding.
Oh.
Yeah, I answered a couple questions as we were going along on that one.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, Bryan?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Zilly. So I'm going to be shifting into, our other stream of research, which is really focusing on upstream suicide prevention for emerging adults. And we did that with the initial entry trainees in the U.S. Air Force. So you guys are probably aware, makes the news a lot, that the suicide rate in the U.S. military has been steadily increasing for over a decade, approaching, and sometimes it has been equal to the U.S. general population rate. With emerging adults, those service members 24 and younger, being of highest risk. So in 2019 and the 2020 Defense Suicide Prevention Office reports, they have identified young enlisted service members as the population of greatest concern across all branches, and have specifically charged the military, the individual branches, to identify and promote connection as a core outcome of future suicide prevention initiatives. So I'm going to share this with everyone. So, how did this end up, with us working with Air Force trainees? Well, along with the military historically being protective, for suicide rates versus the U.S. population, historically the Air Force has also seen lower suicide rates than other branches. But several years ago, that gap began to close, very significantly and rapidly. So since 2008, the overall suicide rate for all branches of service combined has increased 61%, whereas during that same period, the Air Force rate has increased 107%. So, really seeing this trend in 2014, the Air Force requested that an upstream primary evidence-based suicide prevention training be developed specifically for their first-term airmen as they are entering service. And at that time began collaborating with Peter and our team to develop Wingman-Connect, using this network approach to strengthen protective factors and promote connectedness. So for about 17 months, we did just that. We developed Wingman-Connect using our school-based programs as a foundation, and developed this universal upstream prevention specifically for first-term airmen while they're in their technical training phase. So that is the portion of their initial onboarding training that immediately follows basic training. It's where they receive their core job proficiency skills, but it's also where they form their foundational perceptions of Air Force culture and life in the military. So these airmen spend about 2 to 6 months in this phase, within these small classes of 8 to 12 airmen. They spend about 12 to 15 hours a day together. They go to class together, they eat their meals together. And that's really the first time that airmen are allowed to form these first close bonds with other airmen within their career fields, as well as instructors that really serve as kind of the model for professional and peer relationships throughout their careers. So Wingman-Connect really focuses on that technical class unit. It's a universal training as opposed to the peer diffusion model that's used in Source of Strength. And we had to build in additional aspects to really target the norms and connections of that natural organizational element. So the training is a mixture of the high energy games and activities, along with both individual and group skill building exercises that focus on drawing out the personal strengths, those real world examples from the participants surrounding the Four Chord model that we created. So the Four Chord is the central teaching tool that we use throughout the training. We introduce these Four Chords right from the very beginning by asking participants to share how they're present in their lives right then and there in technical school. So for kinship, we invite airmen to share about their friends and family that have given them support since enlisting. Other airmen at Shepherd Air Force Base that keep them accountable, to their responsibilities in technical school, all the while drawing out those personal examples of connection that really provide us a sense of belonging. For purpose, we discuss goals, beliefs, and values that guide us and give us direction, the roles and commitments that we take on that bring us a sense of being valued and contributing to something bigger than ourselves. We use guidance throughout the training. This core is centered around identifying, building, and maintaining connections with people that can provide us the wisdom and perspective and mentoring, both personally and professionally. We talk about how that also includes seeking help for medical and mental health expertise and need. And then throughout the training, we ask the airmen to share about those people that have guided and influenced them on their way to becoming an airman, and also those that they've met since they've enlisted that they can go to for guidance as well. So the final core is balance. So this is, we invite the airmen to share about their preferred healthy activities, their hobbies, what interests them, and how those things specifically in their environment can provide a counterbalance to the stressors of day-to-day life on a training base. But also balance includes keeping all of those cores strong in as many ways as possible, and how that has to be a dynamic process as you go throughout your military career. So at one point during the training, we ask the airmen to share about a core that they're currently strong in, right? That they, right, just how they feel about it in the training and how they're keeping it strong at their training base. And that's all to help us create a legacy video that we then send back out to the entire training group a week or two later via text message. And I got an example of one of those videos right now that I want to share with them. Sure, I have my audios. Wrong one. Too many windows open.
Because I know what I need to do and I just get it done.
I'm focused on getting back to Duluth, so nothing's screwing that up.
Kinship is strong for me right now because, especially like being with my family, I find that I'm cherishing the moments that I do have with my family over FaceTime and over this video.
Kinship is strong for me because I'm used to being around a lot of people, typically my family, but since they're not close by, it gives me somebody else or other people to build a relationship with, and gives me the opportunity to get to know other people, and it's enjoyable.
Kinship is strong for me right now because talking to my friends back home and my girlfriend back home kind of motivates me to keep going here.
Kinship is strong for me because right now I am making a lot of new friends here, and I've had a good time, and I'm meeting new people and networking.
Balance is strong for me right now because I'm doing my school, also doing activities that I like, such as running.
Balance is strong for me right now because currently I am the stress reliever for my classmates.
Guidance is strong for me right now. I said that because I'm definitely trying to just help out, put forth effort to help others that need help.
Guidance is strong for me right now because I have a positive connection with my classmates, and if they need any help with anything, I'll be there for them.
Yeah, so like I said, so really drawing out these personal strengths is kind of the core aspect throughout all of the training. So like Chelsea said, sources of strength is typically done in a single installment. Due to some of the challenges of working in a military environment, we actually went to more of a distributed learning where Wingman-Connect consists of 2-hour blocks of training distributed over 3 consecutive days. And the first 2-hour training is really focused on framing the training as a personal sharing space, introducing the 4 cores, and really getting their voices right to the front and center, hearing from the airmen about the cores in their lives, and really provide the space for them to reflect on these concepts through their own individual perspective and experiences. And day 1 also includes a module outlining the social network science behind our trainings, giving an airman an opportunity. We actually use that same social network diagram that Chelsea shared earlier, to get them thinking about them as an individual, as a part of a social network, both the influences that their network has upon them and also the influence that they have on those around them. So, following this 3 blocks of training, we kind of work our way through a progression where on day 2, we build upon the 4 cores, deepen the concepts by discussing and really pulling in the relationships that are at the center of each core, the people that we seek out for those different areas of guidance, and the relationships that drive our sources of purpose. And it also begins to shift the focus of the training to the class unit as a whole. So after going deeper into the cores, at the end of the second day of training, we issue a class challenge for each individual class that's present at the training to go out and work together as a class, strengthening one of the cores before the third block of training the next day. And then the third day training will start with that, with the class coming back together, reporting back how it went, what they gained, what they learned, and then continue to focus on building and deepening those connections and bonds within the class throughout the remainder of the training on the third day. So towards the end of the third day of training, we pull each of the classes in the training out into their own breakout room on Zoom and work and kind of challenge them or task them to work on identifying the strengths within their class, of those around them, in each of the areas of the four cores. So I also have a short video of the airmen starting to work on that project as well. You can kind of see some of what the training atmosphere is like. So let me one moment to pull that up.
Easton, he's got good purpose. He's got really good values.
I agree with that.
Beamer goes in guidance. He mentors us.
Tells us not to stress out.
I bring a lot of life experience. I think could be put under purpose. He's got really good goals and values.
Noel reminds us to not stress out too much.
Erickson for balance.
Because he provides the quiet voice in the class, and he speaks up when it's necessary.
He's the voice of reason.
I'd say Houston definitely falls under guidance. He's the green rope out of the group. He's definitely always like catching small details.
Guidance, we got Baker, class leader, keeps us on track. Like sometimes our instructor has to leave because he's an IS. So Baker makes sure we're doing what we need to get done. Then we go over to kinship level. She lightens the mood because like we'll be stressing out or something like that. She'll always do something funny. For balance, we got Noel. He reminds us not to stress over.
So, as we go through, like I said, like the airmen only have about 8 or 10 minutes to work on identifying those strengths in their class. But, we found it's one of the most powerful things for the members of that class to hear that accurate appraisal from their classmates. And, after, we worked into kind of framing, like Chelsea said, not in people's flaws or their setbacks, but really in these positive sources of strength and positive connections. I just to spend a couple minutes real briefly just thinking about some of the results that we got from the study. These next couple of slides show some of our findings. So, this is we had around 1,500 airmen as part of our sample. So, these are some of the findings from that. We followed these airmen for a total of 6 months. So this represents the suicidal ideation and depression amongst these airmen when we followed them up at 1 month and then also at 6 months. So at the 1 month point, they were just approaching. They were within a few weeks of graduating technical school. And then at the 6 month follow-up, they had already changed their duty station, were out on their first operational duty assignment. So of our total sample, we did about 60% of the airmen were 18, 19, or 20 years old. And over 85% was under 24. So really in that priority emerging adult demographic. So, these two plots show the by condition comparison between Wingman-Connect and the control condition. Our control condition was an interactive didactic training that really focused on stress and coping mechanisms that we had adapted from existing military behavioral health prevention training. So you can see in both suicidal ideation and depression, there was an immediate sharp drop off in the Wingman-Connect group at 1 month. And that benefit was maintained throughout the duration of that 6 months. So, for depression continued to decline. And with suicide, that benefit was maintained, and it was just barely outside, clinical significance at 6 months. But both of these were significant at the 1 month time point with that large drop. So one of the other things that we looked at was whether or not these individual changes in suicidal ideation were influenced by class level changes. So we created a latent variable for this mediation analysis that included class cohesion, morale, and observed healthy norms and behaviors. And that's the class average level. So, basically at the 1 month follow-up, did the general perceptions of the class as a whole mediate the change in suicidal ideation and depression for the members of that class? And what we found was that about 25% of the reduction in suicidal ideation was attributed to these class, shifts in these class level protective factors. So that really supports that underlying social network theory and how we utilize these natural organizational elements to promote kind of ecological validity and leverage that within a military culture. I think it also illustrates, the adaptability of this, so that you can use this social network foundation and adapt it based on the needs and the structure of a particular population and culture. And particularly in the military, this is very important, as we know this is a healthy population, but it also has lower likelihood of help seeking than general population. So, this indicates some of what we're hoping to see, in that really providing that evidence base for the necessity of upstream prevention as part of the prevention activities to reach those individuals that are not likely to seek help. So, just for a few minutes before we move into open discussion, Chelsea and I wanted to talk a little bit about adapting both of these programs to online for the pandemic. You probably noticed the videos that I shared. Those were the airmen from their rooms in the barracks that were participating in the training. And at least I'll let Chelsea speak for sources of strength, but for Wingman-Connect, because we had those 3 individual blocks of training and had that progression, our process of adapting it to online was less of a one-to-one way of how to conduct an in-person training online, and more of how to use the online medium to accomplish those same progression, to achieve those mechanisms, reaching those milestones with the airmen as a group in the training, to prepare for the next block. So some of the other things, that were, kind of at the tip of the spear for the adaptation were how we utilize games and breakout rooms.
Yeah, and for sources of strength, I was really nervous going into this past year about how we were able to do these trainings online, given that so much of the training day is about building team cohesion, getting that sense of teamwork together, and students that we brought in from all across the social network having to meet each other and work together. I've been really pleasantly surprised that it is totally possible to do online. We've had really robust experiences with connection and some of the key things for that, because I think that there's a lot of benefits to online. So knowing that we can do that, games, really important. Ideally would have loved to make you all play a game with us today, but you got out of it. But games really important for connecting. The breakout rooms, especially I think for young people, they're more hesitant to unmute themselves and share in large groups, but they will do that, especially once they have a chance to go into a small group in a breakout room, connect in there, and then you bring them in the large group. They've warmed up and they're really willing to share. And after one of our recent trainings, we just did a quick survey of them, and 75% of the students said that they agreed that they were able to, on the online training, get to know students they had not met before. And 90% of them felt like they were able to strengthen relationships with adults in their school through the training. So really promising there. And we've noticed, and I think a lot of people who work with young people right now have noticed, there are some students who are actually really thrive in the online environment, where sometimes it's actually harder for them to engage in person, and they've been able to do really well. So I'm hoping we're able to use some of that benefit and keep that going forward.
Yeah, I think we observed a lot of the same things with the airmen. You know, I think at least from our trainer corps, I think we were much more, you know, nervous and inhibited by the medium at first than the younger airmen who are, you know, joining the training via their personal cell phones from their dorm room. You know, we did have to, you know, with a lot of the heavy usage of these fun, engaging activities is one of the core elements of the training. They did have to go through a pretty large transformation process. And for Wingman-Connect, we followed kind of the same idea of how we progress through, you know, the engagement mechanisms surrounding the content with the games, to where, you know, really on the day one, we're just trying to get airmen up out of their seats and having fun. On day two, we elaborate on that a little bit and get them up out of their dorm rooms and interacting with each other. And then on day three, you know, we have designed new games that get them working as small groups or teams to kind of work through that stuff. And the other aspect of the breakout rooms, you know, utilizing those to, you know, just artificially and instantaneously create a smaller group that you can really have those deeper discussions with, and kind of, again, working through that same progression where we have small groups with the same trainer, you know, on day one. Day two, we begin to mix up the trainers. And then on day three, we start to intermix between classes to get some of that, you know, that dissemination from outside of that class of airmen. And some of the I know we see in Sources of Strength, some of the airmen, you know, similar to the way we do here, really use a lot of the chat feature as well. For the Air Force, you know, we kind of leverage the culture there, which is the expectation that communication is predominantly a face-to-face thing. So we use the chat really to just distribute links or any type of information kind of as a logistics utility. And, you know, the airmen, as is true in the military, they follow suit and then engage. That increases our engagement through the video and the discussion groups.
Yes,
we have a couple of questions in the chat about engaging the families. I think Peter addressing it. You might want to say, Peter, if you want to just talk a little bit about that, engaging.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Families.
Thanks, Lily. Yeah, somebody I had at first misunderstood the question, but I'm glad I got clarification on it. Whether Wingman-Connect has any component for spouses, partners, and the short answer is not currently. This first implementation, the Air Force really wanted to start this program with the very earliest, you know, career personnel really in the training period. Most of them are recent high school graduates. As Bryan said, most of them are 18 to 21. But we are now currently in piloting, really providing this training for the next career phase, those that are in their first approximately 4 years of Air Force career. And that's a period when many do become partnered, and we do see that as an important priority. You know, the life of a spouse of somebody in full-time military active service can be challenging. You know, every 2 to 3 years, relocation. You know, many people are living, you know, in the past, often it was on base, now off base, as you know, the communities may be more fragmented. So it's a really important point, and I think it's one that we're definitely interested in seeing how can, you know, we do, we do have airmen share a lot of the videos that they make about these strengths with family members, and one part of a study we did showed that many of them were shared out to family members. But I think that's, you know, probably we need more than that. You know, we need also, you know, how direct experience, and there has been some discussion with the Air Force Suicide Prevention Resilience Office about ways that we might begin to explore that.
We did some training with prevention professionals who are on Marine bases in Okinawa, and we talk about these transition periods and how important it is. And they were very challenge for lots of reasons, primarily for the structure of the organizational structure hierarchy. For instance, we asked about about doing needs assessments, for instance, and they said we can't do a needs assessment. Our colonel tells them what the need is. So I think there's some structural challenges that prevention professionals in the military have. It seems to me this is a lovely program to put into place, not only just for suicide prevention, but for a lot of behaviors that young recruits get into, have problems. Drinking, for instance, was a big problem on the military base. So I think that this is an area that has not received a lot of attention. These transitions, particularly between this age group from adolescence into young adulthood. It's wonderful to see that.
Yeah, just to add to that also, the point about transitions. We also see that as when natural organizational units are forming. That's a part of that transition, because one thing we saw was it was important to really intervene or have groups participate these classes when they were fairly early in their evolution, when they were in the first month or so of being formed. Otherwise, norms might be pretty well set, roles, norms. So I think part of what I think we're seeing is how do you activate and really bring to the fore voices of health, healthy coping, positive examples, so that becomes part of the culture of these young career groups, these young natural organizational groups. And so transitions, I agree. I think there's a lot of evidence in prevention work that transitions are important points for intervention. And I think one way, not just as individuals, but also as newly forming groups and the culture of groups as they're forming.
I just wondered, because we're going to be transitioning now out of COVID, all of us, at all ages. And how we can prepare schools, universities. Seems to me that this would be a natural for a university, for young people coming back, in small businesses. I think there's a lot of potential here for establishing the network of support, because people are going to go through depression. They don't want to share it with their family, perhaps. They're more likely to express it in the workplace.
Yeah, we've actually been really interested in thinking about workplaces, because there's just not been as much prevention done for people in their middle years, and primary care is often a setting, but that's a bit kind of reactive in a way, or it can be. So how to really, and maybe Zoom is really the only way. Workplaces, there aren't a lot of brick and mortar. That I think, it really may be online that we'll have the success of engaging people working together. I agree with all that you said.
Any other comments or questions? If you want to speak out, I think you can. It's up to you. Use your voice. We're coming up on the hour too, so. Okay. If you have any questions, please, you can direct them to us at APSI. We'll be happy to pass them on to the group. As I said, this is going to be recorded, so this has been recorded. So if you want to listen to it, we'll be posting it. I think there's a lot of material here. I particularly am quite interested in the evaluations and the whole network analysis, as Peter knows. Something that intrigues me. I think it's an exciting new area for analysis of these kinds of data, and how it's done. I'm glad you show those networks, because this graphic, I think, is really important. It really highlights what we're talking about here. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your research and your experiences with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
thank you. It's great.
Thanks.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. Lots to think about, guys, in the prevention field.